Well, welcome everyone to our chip in. You can find a seat anywhere you like. There's a couple more seats to the side if you like. My name's Ashley Monroe. I'm the Assistant City Manager for Iowa City, and we came up with this idea. Just the council was, I should say, City Council each year reviews the budget opportunities. We start the process towards the summer. We ask for their ideas and opinions as to things that we should start thinking about including in the upcoming budget. So right now we're planning for fiscal year 20. That means that it starts in July 1st of 2019. And we thought that this would be an especially good opportunity, a good time of year to invite our residents to participate in the process. We are making a special effort to try and engage everyone, and we appreciate your time in coming here today. We're also running this live as a program on Cable Channel 4, and residents following along with the presentation will also get to participate in a variation of the exercises that we have here in person today, which is pretty exciting. For those that can't make it here today, they still get to share their voice. And so we're going to start off the evening with a short presentation, just giving you an overall summary of what our budget process looks like, considerations that the city has to take as we develop the budget, and provide an understanding as to what this community looks like right now, to give you a better jumping off point to share your opinions and feedback about what your priorities are. So I'll have Simon Andrew take it away. Thanks.
Thanks, Ashley. I'll try and be speedy through the boring part of the evening and let you all get to the activities. Again, like Ashley said, really appreciate the turnout, especially this early in the budgeting process. This is by far the biggest participation we've had in my tenure, at least. So thank you very much for your time this evening. As Ashley mentioned, we have an annual budgeting process that we go through. The key date to remember here is that by March 15th, the City Council has to formally adopt the next year's budget and certify that with the county auditor. And so working backward from that, during January and February, Council reviews the proposed budget document. So we'd like to start this time of year and get as much input as we can before we get too far into developing the proposed budget. Just a reminder, we go through this process year-round. Please don't wait until next year if you have thoughts, ideas, questions, concerns to come to us. And you can understand a lot of the processes that the City Council goes through as being budgeting processes. So the strategic planning process, master planning processes that Council engages in really helps determine budgeting priorities, especially on the capital budgeting side. You know, those master planning processes are really what it dictates the budgeting priorities for the next 1 to 5 years through the capital budget. We also do a number of surveys, both community-wide and departmentally. And so really quickly, I'm going to give you an overview of sort of the framework in which we budget, the conditions that we have to be mindful of as we look at the fiscal year 20 budget. Jacqueline Budding from our budget department will get up and very briefly describe where our revenue comes from and where those expenditures go. And then I'll have some closing thoughts on how those impact individuals and households. So this looks more complicated than it is. Well, at least more complicated than we're going to make it tonight, but the city gets its revenue from a number of sources, and frequently those sources have strings attached to them. We have restrictions on how we can spend those. And so tonight we're mostly going to talk about the general fund and capital budgeting. So the general fund is predominantly property tax dollars, and those have the most flexibility as we create our budget. So again, a little bit of the framework in which we are generating the fiscal year 20 budget. Iowa City has been seeing very robust growth over the last several years. We expect that this decade we will add more people in the community than in any decade in the city's history other than the 1960s. And so we have a growing community, which of course brings with it a number of service demands. And coupled with that and creating some challenges, so we have growing service demands, but in recent years the state has changed how we collect property tax revenue. And this really affects apartment buildings, which obviously Iowa City has a large share of apartment buildings. So each year up until 4 years from now, the percentage of apartment buildings value that is taxable will go down each of those years. In the current year, that equates to about $2 million in lost property tax revenue. And for frame of reference, that's about a third of our firefighters is what would be equivalent to that $2 million. But on the bright side, in recent years, we've had a lot of growth, both in our tax base and in one-time revenues. So all the construction you see going around the city, each of those buildings pay for building permits. And we had upwards of $1.5 million extra dollars in building permit revenues the last fiscal year, which helped us weather some of those reductions in revenue from the state. And so the main takeaway from that is, we have to be, especially with those general fund dollars, mindful of these trends going forward, that over the next few years, the tax revenue we get from apartments will step down a little bit, and we will have that increased population to provide services to. Each year when we create the budget, we try and meet a few goals. The main goal is always to pursue the City Council's strategic plan. So the council creates a strategic plan every 2 years, giving us a roadmap as to where we want to go in the future. And so that's really the top priority when we develop the proposed budget. I just mentioned the property tax reform changes and the growing population. And we need to be mindful from year to year that we don't have a large jump in any one tax or fee or property tax revenue, that this is all a big puzzle that comes together, that we don't want to have all those pieces moving in one direction at the same time. We don't want to hit residents with a property tax increase, a water rate increase, trash pickup increase all in the same year. So we try and plan those out and stagger them over a number of years. And when Jacqueline talks about the property tax rate, she will also mention that we need to be mindful of the other jurisdictions' property tax rates too. For instance, our school district has a very aggressive capital plan, and we need to be mindful of how our property tax rate interacts with theirs, that we're not saddling homeowners with all of those changes at the same time, that we leave some capacity for the school district to meet their goals. So I know I raced through that pretty quickly, but Jacqueline will get up here and talk a little bit about our revenue and expenditure mix.
Great. So as Simon mentioned, we'll go through a quick overview of what is made up of our revenues and expenses. For the city, all fund revenues come from a few different pots. The property taxes, that's 36%. That's the largest portion of revenue that we get, with the second largest being charges for services, which would be made up of charges for water, for sewer, parking, landfill, etc. And then the next largest chunk would be coming from intergovernmental, which is federal and state grants, as well as road use tax revenue that comes in each year. And then we compare that to just the general fund revenue sources. You can see that we're pretty property tax dependent in our general fund, with about 65%. This makes the revenues within the general fund very susceptible to changes that they make at the state level. And then the next largest chunk is the miscellaneous, which is made up of intercity charges and parking fines and code enforcement. And then, as Simon mentioned, when you get your tax bill every year, it's made up of different rates. City only sees about 41% of the total taxes that you pay, with the other large components coming from the Iowa City Community School District and Johnson County. So as we said, we try to be mindful of different changes going on in the other taxing authorities, so that we have overall mindful of the overall impact on the residents. And then other major revenue sources in our general fund, one of those is the utility franchise fee. Right now we're taxing at about it's at 1% tax on gas and electric utility bills. And this was passed a while back ago to help with the operating costs for the fire station number 4. Right now we're at 1%. The total that the city is allowed to tax on is 5%, so we have that extra capacity there if needed in the future. And then something else that we are not currently utilizing is the local option sales tax. Right now, Iowa City is one of 2 of the major metros in Iowa that are not utilizing the local option sales tax. This would have to be voted on by the county, and potentially we could see up to about $2 million with that. Or $10 million, sorry. Wrong number. And then on the other side, with the general fund expenditures, there's a few different areas that are the major components of that. You can see personnel makes up a large chunk of that, about 72%, within services, supplies, capital outlay, smaller portions. So we have to be mindful of if we're adding new positions that are going to be paid with property tax dollars, we want to make sure that's sustainable. And then also if it comes to having to cut expenditures, that likely is going to mean cutting people because there's not much wiggle room in the other areas. And with that, I'll pass it back to Simon.
Thanks, Jacqueline. So the main takeaway there is that when we're talking about the general fund, when you're talking about the expenditure side, like Jacqueline said, you're really talking about staffing levels. And when you talk about the revenue side, it's really the property tax levy that is the main source of revenue there. So any changes, those are really the 2 pieces that we're looking at. The city has been well managed financially for some time here. We are one of only 3 cities in the state of Iowa that has Moody's AAA bond rating. And I'm showing both of these slides just to note that as our property tax rate has been decreasing in recent years, that's almost exclusively on the debt service levy. So we've been paying less in interest effectively to banks. We've been borrowing less. We've been retiring debt early. And that lets us devote more of your property taxes to services rather than paying interest on loans. For instance, last year we dropped our property tax levy, but that was really decreasing it in the debt service levy and increasing it paying employee benefits. So we were able to devote more of your tax dollars to services. And this is how it played out overall on an individual home. These numbers are based on a $100,000 assessed value, so you can do the math to adjust it for your home relatively easily. But this is just to point out that there are different factors that affect your property tax rate, not just the city levy, but what percentage of your property the state says is taxable, and then on top of that, what your property is assessed at. And so this is the final slide here, just the overall household impact from fiscal year 18 to 19. And this is what we'll look at when we're looking at fiscal year 20. We had a modest bump in our water rates, but that coupled with the decreasing property tax levy keeps things relatively flat for homeowners and residents. You think of a 3 to 4% increase necessary just to keep up with the cost of personnel and other services and supplies, and we've been well below that in increases in recent years, and this is really what informs that Moody's bond rating as well. So thank you for your time. Again, we sped through that pretty quickly, but just wanted to give you kind of the framework, what's in our heads when we first start approaching the budget.
Thank you so much. So we've had a little background on what really the budget basics, essentially, looking at our fund structure and what we consider as the community changes, state legislation changes, our approach to budgeting. And now we get to the really fun part, actually. Simon had identified the council's strategic plan, our master plans that are developed as part of a community planning process throughout the years. So when people come together and they talk about our parks master plan that was recently completed, we had residents giving feedback as to the things that they value, the places they value, the things they want to do in their neighborhoods, and the things that are lacking. And so in that way, residents have participated in a budgeting process. We have identified projects in our annual budget that is true to the master plan. In parks, in the bicycle master plan, the same thing. We will be putting together the final touches on the climate action plan. It is yet to be approved, but it's out there for review, and that's another plan that we've taken community input and feedback throughout the year and put it into action within a document. So we want to make sure through the budget that we're putting these documents into action. So we need funding or staff time or whatever it is to make these projects become a reality, or these services and programs become a reality. So what we are asking of you today are 3 different exercises. The one that draws the most attention, that really hopefully drew people in because it was intriguing, hopefully, was the chip voting. So we have a stack of 10 chips, so just kind of counting chips. And we're going to provide everyone here with 10 chips. Those who are participating online, it's on our City of Iowa City Facebook page. We will also send out a release with the information on how to access the survey tool and the exercises for those playing at home. And so you'll take the 10 chips. You will take a look at the back wall here. We have instructions as well as a jar for each strategic plan area. They all lay out a different aspect that we want to accomplish. So we have economy, we have walkable urban core, healthy neighborhoods, maintaining a healthy financial status. We have our community engagement and intergovernmental relations component. We have environmental sustainability and racial justice and social equity, and social justice component of our strategic plan. So each of those sections has a couple of projects underneath it. It's potential projects, so you don't have to choose a particular item on that list. If you feel strongly about that category in general, put a chip in. Don't put a chip in. If you really prefer to stack your chips in a completely different section, if you feel great about neighborhood parks, put all your chips in number 3, or racial equity. Number 7 is where we're going to be at. We also have a board for leaving us a specific note. If there's a project or program, a service, a street, you want a pothole fixed in, if you have comments about our pools, whatever it is, you're more than welcome to leave us a written note. We also have a board in the back that's a map. So some people have already taken advantage, putting a dot anywhere that needs special attention. So you can write on a Post-it note back there too if you have specific street name or issue. Slap that on there with your comment. And we're around here for question and answer. We're available. We have our city manager, Jeff Ruin, here. We have our finance director, Dennis Buckenstedt. We have our parks director, Julie Seidel-Johnson. We have our public works director, Ron Kanucky, here. Again, I'm available. I'm Ashley Monroe. And we have Simon Andrew, assistant to the city manager, and Jacqueline Budding, who is our budget compliance officer. So there's plenty of staff around here to answer any questions. We hope that everyone who is watching at home will log in and also give us your feedback. And we're very excited to get the process started. Jeff has the chips. We also have a special one more note on the chip voting. We have a red chip. We'd like everyone to take one red chip and select the area in which you feel strongest about. So, like I said, if you have a particular interest, let us know what that interest is by voting with one red chip in one of the 7 jars. So I'll be around to answer any questions that you have as you participate in the process, and we're so glad everyone decided to spend their evening with us. So thank you very much. We'll be happy to take any questions and go to it. Thanks.